Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 158, the Pottsville Maroons. Today, my guests are Darin Hayes, who many of you might know from his Pigskin Dispatch podcast. Darin is also the author of the terrific book called The World's Greatest Pro Gridiron Team. Also joining today's show is Jeffrey Payne, who is a senior contributing writer for Gridiron Greats magazine and is an expert when it comes to the Pottsville Maroons. Well, the two of them teamed up to write a new book called Marooned, which explores the incredible story of the Pottsville Maroons, their 1925 championship season, and all that took place leading up to the team being stripped of its title. Before we get into today's show, though, just a few reminders, please. Follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at SportsFHeroes. Look for our page on Facebook. And if you want to reach out, please send me an email to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. Also, please follow, rate, and review. And as always, I thank you for your support. Okay, today's show is quite in-depth, so let's get straight into it. Darin, Jeff, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. Obviously, Darin, you've been a guest a couple of times. Jeff, your first time around. I gotta say, this is a pretty neat experiment for me. I've had more than one guest on at a time, but never on three separate cameras. So this is going to be pretty cool. We'll see how it all works out.
But we're happy to be your guinea pigs, Warren.
Yes, we are.
Well, this is going to be fun. We got a great topic here, the Pottsville Maroons. And, you know, for most out there, obviously a lot of football fans, I'm not sure how many know about the real early history of the NFL and where some of the teams were located. And Pottsville, Pennsylvania was one of those places. I mean, you had places like Providence where the Steamroller played, and the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, the Akron Pros. I'm sure not everybody can remember the Kansas City Cowboys. I mean, there are some pretty cool, the Hammond Pros, right? The Rock Island Independents. I mean, a lot of crazy names. And of course, there were the New York Giants and the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Cardinals. And I always like to go back to the Chicago Cardinals because most people, when they are asked, who is the oldest or what is the oldest franchise in the entire NFL, the two teams that come to mind are the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears. Well, the Cardinals preceded both of them. The Arizona Cardinals are actually the oldest franchise in the entire NFL. And they've only won 2 championships, or maybe it's 1 championship. And that's where we're going to go. Is it 1 or 2? And it's because of the Pottsville Maroons. So, question to both of you. Whoever wants to answer, go for it. Who were the Pottsville Maroons and why write the book Marooned?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Take that one, Darin.
Go for it, Darin.
Well, the Pottsville Maroons is something that we wanted to share with our reading audience because there's other books on the Pottsville Maroons, and they're most famous for the 1925 season. That's basically the impetus of the book. You know, we're focused on that 1925 season, but we tell the entire history of Pottsville football. And even before the Maroons and a little bit after the Maroons as well. And they ended up being the best team in the National Football League in 1925, but did not get the title of NFL champions. And that's sort of a crutch that's been going on for 100 years now. And the people of Pottsville still to this day are fighting to try to get their championship restored.
Yeah, like I said, it's a really interesting topic, and most people, again, don't know about the long ago history of the NFL and the fact that a lot of the teams, I don't know if the term is correct, were community teams, but really that's what Pottsville was. That's what Frankfurt was, Rochester, these different cities. And one of the interesting things I found, and um, that I've sort of touched upon in previous podcasts, but really it plays a bigger role in this podcast today, is the schedule. Teams played crazy, a lot of times more than one game a week. Sometimes they played back to back days. Um, and they weren't always necessarily against fellow NFL teams. They played a lot of exhibition games. So before we get into how and what happened to the 1925 Pottsville Maroons, let's set up a couple of things first. How was the schedule determined? And how did these guys play back to back days? Jeff?
Yeah, great question. So back in those days, each NFL owner, each NFL team was responsible for setting their own schedule. So they would usually meet in the summer, the year before the season started. The owners would meet. They would have some conversations about who might want to go where and how to play. But in this day and age, the finances was such a big issue, right? So teams were always trying to figure out if they were going to go on the road, how do I get a couple of games in? Like, could I swing by a couple towns? That's why they were playing maybe twice in 2 days or 3 days. And so usually what would happen is up front, teams would set up a tentative schedule through most of the year, but not through the entire year. And then they would figure that late in the season, they would try to cherry pick some games with either their biggest rivals, or if they were in contention for a title, a game that might attract a lot of fans. They were always trying to think of how can we put a marquee game. It's kind of like, when the NFL like shifts games to Monday Night Football or Sunday night, the flex things they do today. It's kind of like the ultimate flex back then, right? It was I don't know if I'm going to play this weekend, but if I do, I'll kind of see where we stand, and then we'll find the best matchup and see if we can agree to a game. So it was very loosey-goosey in this era.
Were they required to play X number of NFL games? Because like you go back to 1925 and there's 20 teams about in the NFL? Were they, and they all played, anywhere from 6 to 12 to 13, 14 games, but were they required to play a certain number of NFL games, NFL teams?
They were, and I think, Darin, correct me if I'm wrong, I think in 1925 it was only 4 games, I think was the minimum you had to play to keep your league franchise. It moved around over the years, but it wasn't a huge number. And there were some teams that didn't play that many and got kicked out of the league. They played a game or two, things weren't going well, they ran out of money, they disappeared, right? But you did have to play a certain number of NFL games to qualify to be, keep your franchise, but it was very low.
Darin, what about the players themselves? They weren't full-time football players. Sure, a lot of them played in all of the games. They went to all of the practices, but the money wasn't enough to earn a living, right? A year-round living. So a lot of them had second jobs or different jobs, and maybe they couldn't make a particular road trip and play in a particular game. How did that work? Talk about the kind of money that they made back then and how all of that worked.
Well, it was definitely not a activity to make a living on to feed your family. It was more of a hobby to him, I guess, and just some seasonal work, I guess would be a better word for it. There was guys like the famous Tony Latone, who worked in the coal mines of the anthracite area where Pottsville is at. He would work there 10 months a year approximately, and he'd take those 2 months of football to play ball, and he wasn't in the mines much. But there were some guys that were being a high school coach and playing on Pottsville. I assume they had a teaching job maybe at the school too. But they were coming from different backgrounds, different areas of the country, mostly Easterners. But it was a very wide array. The Pottsville roster was, especially in 1925, that really bunch of different individuals that all came together for the sense of the team.
What about jumping from team to team? I think the league tried to control that as much as possible. But the fact is, there were players that jumped from team to team, and not even necessarily from an NFL team to another NFL team. Some of them jumped from an NFL team to, a team that was going to play an exhibition or vice versa. What about that? How did the league try to curb that? And what would happen if you were caught?
Yeah, that's a great one. So the NFL, one of the value propositions that the NFL put out there to prospective franchises is that they weren't going to allow that to happen. So if a player was signed by a team by NFL rules, they could not play for another team unless they got permission. And there were players that moonlighted, moonlit. And sometimes if a team didn't have a game, a player would go and say, hey, you mind if I go over and play for this other team? And could be an NFL team. It was often, as you mentioned, an independent team or another team in the area that was looking for what they called a ringer, right? A good player to play against a rival. That happened a lot. But the other thing that did happen was once your team finished its season, and you'll notice since they had a variable number of games, there were teams in the NFL that would drop off starting in like early November. Even if the season officially went all the way through mid-December, some teams would be just like, hey, we played our games, we survived, we made a little money, we're going to call it a day, we're not going to schedule any more games. If they did that, they did allow their players to latch on to another team and play some additional games through the rest of the season to make some more money. They did allow that, but you had to have finished your season to be allowed to let a player go to another team.
So back in the day, 1925 season, the early 1920s, that was really truly the infancy of the NFL. There had been some other leagues that tried to make it, but the NFL was the one that ultimately made it. And it was a little loosey-goosey. I mean, the rules were still being written, even how to play the game, right? The organization of the game, teams lasting a year or two, teams lasting a game or two. It was really a league in formation as the league was establishing itself. When the league first came about, Pottsville wasn't a member of the league. The 1923, I believe, was the first year. No, what was the first year of the NFL? Was
1920.
1920, right. Pottsville wasn't a part of the NFL back then. They played, I think, in what was called the Anthracite League. And if not, they were teams that worked in the anthracite business. What is anthracite? Tell me what anthracite is, and what is the Anthracite League? Who did Pottsville play?
Anthracite is, from what I understand, it's the most valuable form of coal, and it's very much abundant in that area of eastern Pennsylvania where Pottsville is, which is sort of northwest of Philadelphia in that area, in the central part of the state, central eastern part. And so it was very valuable, in the early 20th century because people were heating their homes with it and they wanted the best fuel source that they could. So it was a very good business to be in at that time for anthracite coal. So most of these people that lived around Pottsville were miners. Pottsville was sort of a community, though, that did a lot of business and trade where the miners could shop and businessmen could interact, and it was sort of a business hub of the area, and that's why it really grew up. So these teams around that area were made up of a lot of workers in the mines and laborers in factories and such, and they had a lot of different small communities, and they got competitive and decided to start playing football against each other. Pottsville, the Maroons team that we're talking about, really didn't join the official Anthracite League until 1924, the year before they went into the NFL. They used it purposely as a stepping stone to get into the NFL. And in the meantime, that year in an Anthracite League, they not only ticked off most of the teams in the Anthracite League, but they ticked off the NFL as well because of what you were just talking about a little bit ago, grabbing some players from other teams and signing them on to their own team. Doc Striegel, the owner, he was ruthless, a businessman, and he wanted to field the best team he could and did what he could to get the best players.
You said Doc Striegel. That's where I was going to go next. So why don't you continue there with Doc Striegel, and then Jeff, I want you to tell me a little bit about a guy by the name of Joe Zacco. So Darin, let's talk about Doc Striegel. Who is Doc Striegel, and what makes him such an instrumental part of this story?
Well, Doc Striegel is a Pottsville native. He grew up around the area. He went to high school there. Him and his brother George were tremendous athletes in high school and college, very well known around the area, very well respected. George went on to be a lawyer in that area. John became a doctor and was a physician there in town, so very well respected. He was the team physician for the Pottsville 11 early on, and eventually ended up buying the team and running the team into the glory years, the 1924 through 1927 thereabouts seasons, including 1925, their first year in the NFL. And he really did a lot to try to stir the community up. He wanted it to be a community team. I think that was his intention. He did everything he could. He didn't really want to fund it, even though he had the wherewithal to do so. He wanted the community to do it so they would support it, and even looked at teams like Green Bay, which is still a community team, as a model, and just never could quite get that to happen. And he ended up doing a lot of funding himself. But he's an integral part of why they were in the NFL.
Yeah, he wanted to issue stock, I guess, just like Packers, right? The Packers are, I guess, traded. The community owns them. You, me, Jeff, any of us could go buy some stock in the Green Bay Packers and call ourselves part owner of the Packers, but we have no rights to make any decisions whatsoever when it comes to the team. By the way, anthracite miners, I love the name of the park where they played, Minersville Park. Pretty cool. So Jeff, tell me about Joe Zacco.
Yeah, so Joe Zacco was also affiliated with the team, but he wasn't an owner. He was a sports booster, and he also ran the local sporting goods store. His claim to fame up front was that Doc Striegel, when he was getting his team ready to go into the Anthracite League and then ultimately into the NFL, he needed uniforms, and everybody in town turned to Joe Zacco. He was well known in the entire region. He outfitted lots of high school teams, college teams, others. He had a sporting goods store downtown Pottsville, also a Pottsville native. And Doc Striegel turned to him, and it was last minute too. Doc was so focused on getting the team ready, he forgot that they didn't have uniforms. And he ran in to see Joe Zacco. The story goes just a few days before their first game. And he was like, "Hey, can you get me some uniforms?" And, Joe Zacco's like, "Gosh, I mean, it usually takes a couple of weeks, to order those and get those." He's like, "Look, I don't care what they are. I don't care what color. I don't care anything about it. if you can make it happen, I'll be indebted to you. And he said, would you be indebted enough to name Zacco's, store as your official outfitter for your team? He was thinking marketing, for his store. And Doc Striegle's like, yes, just get it done. So Zacco apparently, according to the story, made some calls, used his connections, well connected in the area, and he located some maroon colored jerseys that were down in, I think, Philly or somewhere in that direction. And he had them express, sent up by train overnight and got them to Striegel in time for the game. And Striegel was so appreciative, he just decided to call the team the Maroons. So that's kind of how they got their name. Joe Zacco would be a big fan for many years, but then he really came into his own when it was discovered that Pottsville was not listed as the 1925 NFL champions. For years, people in Pottsville assumed they were. That's a whole story in and of itself. But when he and others discovered that they weren't, he went on a crusade, a personal crusade, to try to get the NFL to give Pottsville back their championship. And of course, based on the name of the book, our book, Marooned, they are still marooned. They have not gotten that back. Unfortunately, Joe Zacco passed away in 1975. One of his sons picked up the ball, took it for, a couple more decades. But they've never gotten recognition from the NFL that they were the champs.
Yeah, we'll get back to that in a second.
Yeah.
What was the motivation for Striegel to move the team from the Anthracite League to the NFL? And how did he convince NFL owners, the NFL president, Joe Carr, to accept Pottsville? And how close was Pottsville to not being accepted into the NFL? How did all that work? Why did he want to get there? And how did he convince everyone to get him there?
He had himself in a pretty volatile situation, because as we talked about just a few minutes ago, when he was in the Anthracite League, he decided to sign 3 players from the previous NFL champion, the Canton Bulldogs, who were having some financial difficulty. That's when they were being bought by Cleveland, eventually became the Cleveland Bulldogs. He took 3 of their star players, including Fats Henry, to come and play for Pottsville in the Anthracite League. And this really upset not only the Canton ownership, former ownership, the new owners in Cleveland, but Joe Carr got involved and said, hey, you can't let that happen. They ended up going to court. George Striegel, Doc's brother, represented Doc and the Pottsville team, and ended up winning the case so that those 3 former Canton players were allowed to play for Pottsville in the Anthracite League. So fast forward a year later, now Striegel wants to get into the NFL. He already has made some enemies, including the president of that league. He comes up with the money. There was I think it was a $5,000 sum to join the NFL. I don't think I'm right on that, Jeff, aren't I? So 5,000. It was something like that. It wasn't
a huge amount of money. Maybe 2,500. It wasn't a huge amount of money.
Right. They came up with the sum to do it. Of course, Doc wanted it to be community funded. He ended up, I think, putting money in himself. Goes to the meetings that they had somewhere in the Midwest, I believe in Chicago, and has sort of begs, say, hey, can I join your league? And the one caveat that teams really liked, that really got them in the NFL, is Pennsylvania had blue laws where you could not play professional sports on Sundays, including Major League Baseball or professional football. But Pottsville was a great place to have a Saturday game. Frankfurt, they really didn't care. They would play on Sundays. So you would sort of get, I'm sorry, it was the other way around. Pottsville didn't obey the laws. Frankfurt did. So you'd play a Saturday game at Frankfurt, and then on Sundays you could play in Pottsville. Teams and the players could get double dip that weekend if you're traveling from Chicago or somewhere, and make 2 paychecks that way, and they had a great time. So that was sort of what really enticed the rest of the ownerships to let them in the league.
I would add to that, this is an interesting story, Warren. The other thing Striegel did, he was a marketing genius, was there was an opportunity to play an independent team in 1924 down in Atlantic City. And they were called the Roses, Melrose Athletic Club. And Atlantic City back then was a hot place, boardwalks and all sorts of great stuff. And he had this idea, which was he was going to try to convince people from Pottsville to all go down there together and put a huge showing on down there. And he invited Joe Carr to come to the game. He was like, hey, we're trying to get in the NFL. Why don't you come down and see us play? We're going down. I want to show you how we draw fans. He got 4,000 people to go from Pottsville, take trains. There were people that took motorcycles, cars, to go to Atlantic City for this game. They played down there on the boardwalk, down close to the shore. Pottsville won the game. He also used it as a recruiting trip. He invited a bunch of players that he either wanted to steal from other teams or that were in college that he was recruiting, and he all invited them to see this whole spectacle too. And I think that really impressed Joe Carr, that he could draw that kind of a crowd for an away game like that.
Yeah, you talk about that in your book here, Marooned. Great book. I enjoyed reading it. The two of you did such thorough research. And of course, like with every podcast I do, we can't talk about every single detail, because if we did, A, we'd be here forever, because I always find this stuff fascinating. And B, there'd be no reason for anybody to go out and get the book. So we're going to jump along here a little bit. But before we do, what made Doc Striegel and anybody else associated with the Pottsville Maroons, what made them think that they were good enough to compete with NFL teams?
Well, they had NFL caliber players for sure. Like we said, Pete Henry was on that team. They had quality coaching, who people that had proven themselves in the college ranks and in the professional ranks. And they had some great recruits from college, like Charlie Berry coming out of Lafayette. The Stein brothers that previously played for, which was one of the invitees that Jeff was just talking about, that went to the Roses game in Atlantic City. The Stein brothers, one played for Pitt, one played for W&J, tremendous athletes. They played for the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets the year before. So now, coming into the NFL, they've also made an enemy of their nearest rival, Frankfurt, which is in Philadelphia, by poaching some of their players as well. Doc Striegel was sort of a volatile person coming in the NFL, and I think a position he sort of enjoyed and thrived on.
Let's talk about we can't hit everybody on the team. We just talked about the Stein brothers. What about the coach? I know I'm going to get this wrong. Dick Rauch? How do you
I've heard it every different way. I've heard it Rock as well. It's Rauch or Rock.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about him.
So he played at Penn State. We are #we are. Played at Penn State and then went into the coaching ranks. Was a coach at Colgate. He did, after he graduated, for a while, he was an assistant at Penn State as well. Very well known as an assistant. And Doc Striegel actually met him when he and the coach, the then coach, captain of the Pottsville team prior to going to the NFL, in fact, prior to even becoming the Maroons, went to Penn State to see some players and meet up with some people. And met Dick Rauch, and really liked him. Convinced him to come on the weekends and play for them. So he was like, "Hey, you want to make some money on the side? You want to play?" And so he started playing off and on, sometimes under an assumed name. A couple of people were playing still under assumed names. They didn't want their employer to know they were moonlighting. right? So he doesn't show up a lot in the record books early on, but there were some confirmations that he was playing with the team there for a while. Originally, the plan, though, was when they were going into the NFL, Harry Robb was supposed to be their coach. Harry was one of those Canton Bulldogs that Darin mentioned had been stolen away from Canton. Fortunately for the Maroons, those three players ended up going back to Canton the next year. Canton got their ducks back in a row and financially got themselves situated. And Fats Henry and Harry Robb and Larry Conover left the Maroons after playing with them in 24 and were not on the 25 team. And so now Striegel not only didn't have his quarterback and his tackle and another lineman, he didn't have his coach. And he remembered that some of the Maroons players, in fact, the captain of the team, one of the Beck brothers, he noticed he was always talking to Dick Rock during the games. Like they were on the field together. They're always talking. Beck was calling the plays. And, Striegel asked him one time, so why are you and Dick Rock always talking out there? He goes, man, that guy's got such a sharp mind. He understands this game so well. He's almost like a coach on the field. That stuck in Striegel's mind. And when he needed a coach, he turned to Dick Rock and said, I think he's the man for the job. The players seem to respect him and think he can do it. And he has coaching experience. So let's go with it.
You mentioned this name earlier, Darin, Tony Latone. Tell me about Tony Latone.
Tony Latone was, like I said, he came out of the coal mines. This dude was just like a rock solid athlete, just a bundle of muscle, and he was just famous for just brute force. He didn't try to dodge around people. When he hit a hole, he hit it with everything he had, and he was like a hammer, and the defense was a nail. And they used this to their advantage quite a bit because they really had a lot of talented running backs on the 1925 team, especially. And Tony was just sort of that guy that would just pound a defense into submission, and then you bring in the quick guys to go around the end, or after the defense is seeing stars from Tony Latone pounding him so much. Or sometimes they would do it the opposite way. They would have the speedy guys sort of wear them out, and then Tony would come in late in the game and just be just abusive up the middle, hitting the A gaps to in the tight yardage situations, because football is a little bit different then. And they definitely had the best of both worlds where they could do those kind of things with Tony.
A couple others, Barney Wentz. Jeff?
Barney, another Penn Stater. Love those Penn Staters. Yeah, so Barney was a Penn Stater as well. He was a local kid, just like Tony Latone from at least the Anthracite area. Barney had gone to Penn State. He'd come back to the Shenandoah area where he lived, and he was another hammer. I mean, boy, Darin mentioned the backfield. The backfield that the Maroons had was really an incredible field. They had speed, they had power, they had it all offensively in 1925-26. And Barney was a critical component. He only played pro ball for 2 years, and he was All-Pro, first team All-Pro 1 year, second team All-Pro the other year. And then he decided he'd coached a local team for a bit. He kind of liked coaching. He decided he was going to head back to the Shenandoah area and coach, and he actually became a politician and represented the city for a while as well. But just a hammer too. I mean, him and Latone were definitely a 1-2 punch up the middle. Those two, always a fresh set of legs out there.
Got two other guys I want to hit on. This one just because I love the name, Hoop Flanagan. Go for it, Darin.
Yeah, who was sort of a mercenary player, but Pottsville got their hands on too. And this guy was just, I guess from all descriptions, just reading about him in the newspapers, he was sort of that scat back, a very skilled runner. picked his holes, had great timing and great speed, and really kept defenses off balance, especially when you had those two big guys running the ball that we just talked about. But Hoot has a great name. I agree.
The other one is, to me, one of the most fascinating personalities, and that would be Charlie Berry. Charlie Berry, just wow. Uh, NFL, Major League Baseball. I got to do a podcast on this guy, period.
Yeah.
Tell me about Charlie Berry.
Charlie Berry. He was the All-American boy, they called him, right? I mean, All-American football player at Lafayette. He was one of the recruits that Striegel had wooed to come to Atlantic City for that game. They wanted Charlie Berry. They needed an end. Striegel had an interesting philosophy. He really thought that the NFL's offenses were very unimaginative. And he really felt like too much of it was just up the middle, right? 2 yards in a cloud of dust, maybe 1 yard in a cloud of dust. And he wanted to mix it up. And so he was looking for a quarterback. He was looking for speed on the outside. As Darin mentioned, he wanted runners that could not just go up the middle, but could hit the ends. He wanted to be able to go at you from whatever angle you needed. And he wanted a coach that would exploit weaknesses on the other team. And that's exactly what happened with the team they put together. But Charlie Berry was, one of the critical components. He was a Major League Baseball player. So he played for the Philadelphia A's. That's one of the reasons why, and he was from Jersey, so he was local. That's one of the reasons why he was attracted to Pottsville. Is he wanted to stay pretty close to home. He wanted to stay close to his baseball team. He's playing in Philadelphia for the A's. It did mean he couldn't start until the baseball season ended. So he only played pro ball for a couple of years. And he was all pro both years he played. There's no question in my mind, if he had played a long career, he'd be in the Hall of Fame, Pro Football Hall of Fame. Instead, he decided to go with baseball. He had a long career as a catcher. And then he went into umpiring. He was an umpire forever. He is great stats in the book. He's the only player to ump the World Series, referee the college all-star football game, and referee the NFL championship game. He was one of the referees for the greatest game ever played, Colts Giants in '58. Just an incredible story. And he plays into the, kind of trying to get the championship back too. He was a longtime advocate of the Maroons and tried to work his network to help the Maroons. Just a fascinating story. And just, you read his bio and you're just like, this kid was an All-American, everything he touched. It was just amazing.
And he was a rookie in 1925. I mean, he's fresh out of college.
Yeah.
And he was a stud player for him.
Yeah, well, so much so that he was, when he showed up, within a couple of weeks, he so took command of the team, he's a rookie, that the captain of the Maroons, Duke Osborne, who is a longtime NFL vet, all-pro himself, stood up at a meeting and said, I'm turning the captainship over to Charlie Berry. He is the captain of this team. And from that point on, Charlie Berry was the captain. Just must have been just an incredible person.
Yeah, maybe he was the Bo Jackson or the Deion Sanders of his day, except, like you said, he was a terrific baseball umpire and a terrific NFL official and college official. I mean, just, he did things that nobody else has ever done. Pottsville, in its inaugural season of 1925, goes out and wins 10 games, only loses 2. They are the NFL champions. But another team, the Chicago Cardinals, actually wind up with a better record. The Cardinals go, I think, 11-2-1 or something like that. Basically, back in the day, the team that had the higher winning percentage was didn't matter how many NFL teams you played against or how many non-NFL teams you played against over the course of your schedule in a particular time frame, sometime I think in September through the middle of December, as many games as you played, the team that had the highest winning percentage, as long as you played against the requisite number of NFL teams, the team that wound up with the highest winning percentage was named or crowned the NFL champion. Yeah, the Cardinals won 11-2-1. But it's not as easy as that. It's not as easy as saying, well, the Cardinals were 11-2-1, Pottsville was 10-2, so Chicago, you're the NFL champions. That's not, it's just not as easy as that. So this is going to take a little bit, but Pottsville is on its way to the NFL championship, and then everything falls apart because of Frankfurt, because of Scheid Park, because of Joe Carr, and because of, oh gosh, I'm sorry, the other name, Carr's assistant in the office, his name escapes me.
Jerry Corcoran.
Yeah, Jerry Corcoran. Pottsville doesn't get the NFL championship. This is, just take me through, the two of you bounce off each other, however you want to do it. What happened? Why this game at Scheid Park against Notre Dame, the Four Horsemen, Seven Mules? They had permission to play. They didn't have permission to play. What happened?
Well, first of all, just to be clear, the NFL championship was based on NFL games against NFL teams. So their independent games didn't count to the record of who would be to the championship. So that's why that's part of a little bit of the controversy, because at the end there's a few of the games that are some people, like NFL.com recently, is not counting the last two games of the Cardinals that would make them have a better record. If you look at NFL.com recently, they show Boston, who before that was Pottsville Maroons, being in first place at the end of the season by record. So that's a modern day thing that's added to the controversy.
That's an interesting thing, because I've always heard the other way around, that it's the team that had the higher winning percentage, because in what you're saying right there, Darin, really makes this make no sense.
Yeah, it's definitely that, because there's I believe they had a preseason game, we would call it today, a warm-up game before they had their NFL schedule. That game is for Pottsville is not counted into the official NFL record. And that's why there's some question on some of the Cardinals' later games, which, there's some questionable rosters there that they might not be considered NFL rosters, that they are no longer counted on those games as well. But anyway, you have these sort of the perfect storm for Pottsville. They're flying high. They lose to the Providence Steamroller. They lose to their arch rival Frankfurt Yellow Jackets sort of mid-season. They sort of get their stuff together, and they go on. They beat both those teams, and they're on a roll. They're knocking off everybody. And Joe Carr gets ill in the midst of all of this, and has a pancreatic disease.
Pancreatitis?
Yeah, pancreatitis. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you for helping me untie my tongue. So he's sort of out of commission, and has Corcoran sort of step into him. And I'll let Jeff piece this part of the puzzle together.
Yeah, this is where it gets crazy. So Doc Striegel was offered this opportunity to play this exhibition game. And as I mentioned, these teams were always looking to make money. And the exhibition game was, promoter was setting it up, and he had convinced the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame, who are now graduates, so they were pro players. The year before, they'd won the college championship. The Four Horsemen of Notre Dame, and almost the entire rest of the Notre Dame team that had graduated. He formed an all-star team. He called them the Notre Dame All-Stars. and he convinced them to play a game against the best opponent they could find in Shibe Park in Philly. And this promoter zeroed in on the Maroons. And this was actually before they were at the top of the NFL. They were close, but they weren't the top team. But they were local. They would draw well. There were some reasons why he didn't approach the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, who were the local team. Lots of controversy about that and why that happened, but lots of opinions. But he approached Pottsville. Doc Striegel knew the rules, though. Doc Striegel knew that you were not allowed to play an exhibition game during the regular season unless you had the NFL's permission to play an exhibition game during the regular season. Once the season ended, you could do whatever you pleased. And this was still during the season. He also knew that the game was going to be in Philly. That's where Frankfurt is. Frankfurt's a suburb of Philly. And here's where it gets controversial, and that there was at least an unwritten rule that you weren't supposed to play in other teams' territories during the season. You're supposed to stay in your zone, right? And play in your home area or play in somebody else's home area. You were not supposed to invade somebody else's territory. And Doc Striegel readily admitted that he checked Frankfurt's schedule. Frankfurt did not have any other games scheduled for the rest of the season. He was figuring, they're packing it up for the year, right? Like a lot of teams do. End of November, early December. They don't have anything on the schedule. But I better call the NFL and make sure this is okay. He calls the NFL. He gets this guy named Jerry Corcoran. Now, here's where the controversy is. Joe Carr, as Darin mentioned, was ill. He was recovering from surgery, emergency surgery. Jerry Corcoran's managing the phone at the NFL office. Why is he doing that? Well, he's a friend of Joe Carr's. He's the owner of the local Columbus team. And he's the only person affiliated with the NFL other than Joe Carr that's in Columbus, Ohio. And that's where the office is. That's where the phone is. And this is, of course, before call forwarding, voicemail, all that stuff. Somebody had to be sitting by the phone. And so Doc Striegel calls up and he explains. Jerry Corcoran answers, doesn't skip a beat. I believe this isn't the first time Jerry Corcoran was answering the phone. Joe Carr traveled a lot. He was always at games. I mentioned he was in Atlantic City. Somebody was answering the phone. Jerry Corcoran was the only person local that could be answering that phone. But he was not a league official. He was an owner. And he hears Doc Striegel's story. We want to play this game, Notre Dame, it's exhibition, it's great for the NFL. Frankfurt doesn't have any games left. Jerry Corcoran says, all sounds great to me. Do it. Doc Striegel hangs up. He says, we got permission. There were 3 witnesses in the room. We'll talk about that later. There were people that heard this conversation. They were with Doc Striegel. He said, hey, great. I got permission from the NFL. The next day, he signs a contract with the promoter to play in Frankfurt or play in Shibe Park in Philly. Now he's got a contract signed. Joe Carr, president of the NFL, comes back in the office. He gets a call from the Frankfurt managing director of the team who says, hey, Pottsville's coming down here to Philly to play a game. That is not right. The season's still going. They're violating my territory. I'm submitting a protest to this game. Joe Carr hears that and he goes, yeah, that's not right. That's not right. You're not supposed to do that. He calls up Doc Striegel and he says, you can't play this game. Doc Striegel says, I already got permission. I talked to Jerry Corcoran. He gave me permission. Joe Carr may be mad because he, had a court case against Striegel and Striegel kind of pushed him around a little bit in court. Hard feelings, maybe. He's like, it's too bad, right? That's the rule. Those are the rules here in the NFL. If you play that game, you're going to be punished severely. Doc Striegel, he's like, oh, this isn't good. He says, well, I got a contract. Well, if the promoter sues me, will the NFL cover the costs? Because, I'm probably going to get sued. We're 3 or 4 days before this game now, and all this is happening. It's already being promoted. It's all set. Joe Carr says, well, we'll help you out as much as we can, but we can't promise we can cover all the losses that you might incur. Doc Striegel's like, oh, man. So he calls the promoter. He says, hey, I got trouble with the NFL. Can I get out of this contract? Promoter says, absolutely not. I've been marketing this game for a month. It's 3 days from now. Notre Dame's packing up their bags. They're coming to town tomorrow. No, I'm not letting you out of the contract. If you don't show up, I am suing you. Doc Striegel talks it over with his brother, George, the attorney. And they go, all right, well, which is the worst scenario, right? Do we not play the game and get sued and lose who knows how much money? Do we play the game and then fight with the NFL later about this whole situation, which in their eyes, the NFL caused? They decided to play the game. Because of that, Joe Carr suspended them. And, and that's when all hell broke loose, basically, around the opportunity to get their championship.
So at that point, was prior to this, was Pottsville the NFL champion? Were they going to be the NFL champion? Based on their record, based on the Cardinals' record, had this game not taken place, would Pottsville have been crowned NFL champion?
Well, there was a solid date set before the season started by Joe Carr, December 20th. That was the end of the NFL season. So only games played on or before December 20th against other NFL opponents would count towards who the best team would be, who had the best record. It was a 3-team race near the end of the season, the last 3 weeks. It was Frankfurt, it was Pottsville, it was the Chicago Cardinals. Chicago's definitely out in the lead. The other two are chasing. Frankfurt loses to Pottsville. They go on to lose a couple other games. They're sort of out of it. So Joe Carr takes the opportunity to say here with about 2 weeks left, says, you know what? Pottsville and the Chicago Cardinals need to play each other. We don't need to have them end up in a tie. We need a clear-cut winner. And gosh, what a great marquee moment this would be for the NFL to have your two top teams play for a quasi-championship. It wasn't deemed that officially, but the newspapers were calling it the NFL championship game 7-8 years before there was an NFL championship game. So Pottsville travels up to Chicago. They play the game. The people up in Chicago are thinking there's going to be no contest against us. Actually, Pottsville, there's another team that's sort of in it too. There's a Detroit team. It's not the Lions at that time, but there's a Detroit franchise.
The Detroit Panthers.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the thick of things, but nobody's really counting them to be one of these teams that are vying for this championship. So they end up having to cancel their game with Pottsville, which was scheduled the day before. They play the Cardinals because if Pottsville loses that game, that Cardinals game doesn't mean anything. They want to make sure there's money coming into that Cardinals game. Pottsville goes into that Cardinals game and beats the Chicago Cardinals, embarrasses them, quite frankly, on their home turf. And now with 2 weeks left, they have the upper hand and could coast all the way to victory. But they have this opportunity to, they're the best team in the NFL. They have an opportunity to play the best college team, the defending champions, the Notre Dame four horsemen team of legendary status. And at the same time, this is a big year for the NFL. This is when Red Grange has entered into the league. His barnstorming tour is kicking in at the same exact time. And so that's why sort of that promoter that Jeff was talking about earlier, he's sort of miffed at Frankfurt, who is in his hometown of Philadelphia, because he was supposed to schedule them for the Red Grange game against the Bears, and they went out and did it on their own and sort of cut him out of the loop. So he said, I'm getting the next best name out there. I'm getting the Four Horsemen to come in, and they're going to play Pottsville. And he had to play it at Shibe Park. So it's sort of the perfect storm is happening here. And that's sort of what Pottsville was faced with 2 weeks left in the season.
So the
Red Grange, they were up. They were up. So Pottsville at that point was 10-2. Cardinals were 9-2. So the Pottsville Maroons had the better record. If it had ended that day, they'd be the champs. Now, Pottsville had one game scheduled after that. The Cardinals had no game scheduled, but they quickly started scheduling games, right? Because, as mentioned, you could add games as long as it was to the 20. I'm pretty confident that if Pottsville hadn't been kicked out of the league and they had been able to finish the season, they would have made sure they played enough games to be the NFL champs if they were in the league, even if the Cardinals played a few additional games, which they did. And the Cardinals were trying to attract the Bears and Red Grange to another game because they had screwed up. They played the very first game Red Grange played out of college was against the Cardinals. And the owner of the Cardinals was unsure, like, what kind of a turnout there would be. There was a radio station that was going to broadcast the game for free. The weather looked like it was going to be really bad. And so he took a guarantee for the game. Usually teams would take the box office. If they thought it was going to be a big, a big attendance, they would take a cut of the box office. Instead, he was offered a guaranteed amount to play the Bears. He took the guarantee, which was not very smart because that game against, the Bears and Cardinals, I don't remember how many it drew, Darin, if you remember or not, but it was 30, 40, 50,000 people.
They lost they lost like 10 grand if they would have done the other option.
Yeah. And so the owner of the Cardinals was hoping if he could schedule a few more games, especially once Pottsville got kicked out, be looked at as the best team. He really was driving toward, I want this big payday with Red Grange before the end of the season. And maybe I can recoup some of that loss that I had. So he had an ulterior motive to play some additional games anyway.
So Pottsville is suspended from the league. The Cardinals, Chicago Cardinals, go on and play a couple more games, and they are ultimately awarded the NFL championship. Pottsville is suspended, and they are now don't know what to do. And there's a lot of people in Pottsville obviously upset with what's going on. So they're suspended, and almost, I don't know, they might have even been kicked out of the league at this point. They were not a part of the NFL. But then Striegel makes a call to Joe Carr, and they have some sort of a negotiation to get back into the league. And Striegel was pretty smart at this point because Red Grange and CC Pyle were forming a new football league, the AFL, the American Football League, not the same one that became the American Football Conference of the 1960s. This is a whole different AFL. And he uses that as a card against, no pun intended, uses that as a card against Carr. Hey, pretty good. He uses that against Carr and says, look, I want back in. If you don't, I'm keeping the team together. We're going to go play in Red Grange's league. Well, Joe Carr doesn't want that to happen. So a negotiation between Carr and Striegel takes place. And I think with some of the other NFL owners too, they have to be on board. And they allow Pottsville back into the NFL. They have to pay a fine, and there was some negotiation going on there too. There was money owed to Pottsville, and Pottsville had to pay to get back in the league. So money changes hands or doesn't change hands. But part of that negotiation is Striegel thinks or is under the assumption that somehow Pottsville is going to be awarded the 1925 NFL championship. It's going to be taken away from the Cardinals and given to Pottsville. And if I understand correctly, Striegel assumes that it has happened and goes around, at least in the beginning, thinking Pottsville has got the championship. They're the champions again. But that's not what happened. So take me through that little part of the story.
Well, technically, the NFL said they voted that the Cardinals should receive the championship, but Chris O'Brien, the owner, based on some of the embarrassment of those final two games, which included pulling in some high schoolers to one of the game to field a team, he was fine too. They were part of the punishment that Joe Carr was handing out. He was embarrassed, and he did not accept the championship. In fact, he didn't come to the meeting, and he publicly declined the Cardinals taking the championship. The Cardinals were did not accept the championship until a different owners came in, I believe in 1932,
The
7
Bidwell.
years later. So, yeah, the Bidwells took it. And the Bidwells had nothing to do with the Cardinals in 1925. So it was they're really they got done with they would always announce it at their winter meetings, which were I believe in early February, and that's when they would announce, okay, and it went all the way back to 1920 when the Akron Pros were the champions. They weren't declared champions until at the owners meetings, the winter owners meetings. So they came out of that owners meetings in February. Nobody was the champions, and you had two teams that were sort of in hot water, but it was decided they didn't have to pay their fines, and it was unclear what was going on with CC Pyle and Red Grange, or what they were going to do. They had petitioned to have a team in New York, an NFL franchise in New York, and were declined at that same meeting. So there's a lot going on in the season. There's a lot going on at that winter meeting, and an apologetic Joe Carr sat there and said, even talked a lot about Pottsville, almost a page and a half in the official meeting notes of the NFL meetings, saying, he liked the people of Pottsville. He liked Striegel. He liked, hanging out with these guys. They were his buddies. But they didn't listen to him. So he was apologetic about that. And I think he felt kind of bad the way everything went down, especially when Chris O'Brien, the team that he said should be the champions, says, hey, I don't want your championship. We're tainted. We aren't taking this title. So the NFL really had no champion in 1925.
So at that point, when O'Brien didn't accept the championship and this negotiation had happened with Pottsville and the NFL, wasn't there a period of time, or maybe I didn't read it correct, or I just don't remember, but wasn't there a period of time when Striegel thought, well, we are the NFL champions? Because it was later on when Striegel recognized, wait a minute, what's going on here? Or somebody, maybe it was Zacco, somebody said, hold on a second. I thought we were champions, and now I'm just finding out we aren't champions. Maybe it was in 1933 when the Bidwells came in and accepted the championship or whatever. But there was a period of time, I think, when Pottsville thought that they were the NFL champions.
Yes, Pottsville thought, after they were reinstated, they were under the impression that meant they were the champions, because Joe Carr had actually also declared that at least one, if not two, of those late season Cardinal games were to be stricken from the record. And as Darin mentioned, just recently, they've taken, at least NFL.com, right? Is that the official site? Has taken those two wins out. They've always been there for the Cardinals. And in fact, ironically, the game where some high school kids played, the Cardinals were given a win, but the team they beat that had the high school team was not given a loss. So you had more wins in NFL history than losses. Why would you do that unless you were trying to prop up the record of the Cardinals? There's no other reason for you to do that. You either call them a win and a loss, or you call it a nothing burger. You can't have it both ways, right? And that's always been one of Pottsville's arguments was, how can you call this game a win? And Joe Carr even officially in the record books, and the owners voted on it to strike that game, at least that one game from the record, if not both of the games that were suspect. But Pottsville left the summer meeting. At least everybody in Pottsville thought that Pottsville was the champs. And ironically, in 1930, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, when they published their yearly brochure, they showed all the records of all the Yellow Jackets teams through history. And they listed the NFL champions for each year. In 1925, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, who protested the Maroons and had this whole thing with them, listed the Pottsville Maroons as the NFL champs. So even Frankfurt thought a couple years later that Pottsville had been given the championship. It wasn't until 1945, though. So Pottsville always thought they had the championship. They always bragged about the championship. They talked about the championship. It wasn't until 45 that it was discovered that the NFL official records had the Cardinals listed as the champions. And that's when it all broke loose in Pottsville. And they were like, wait a second. So what happened, right? How did this transpire? And that's when they started fighting to get their championship back.
It was certainly an exhausting time for Doc Striegel, and there was other infighting going on with the Maroons, with team ownership, community ownership, players being sold a team for all of $1. Again, all in the book. Great job, guys. Terrific stuff in this book. And there's so much more to the story about the Maroons, but we're really talking about 1925 and the championship season. Pottsville really didn't last a great deal longer than that. They played in 26 in Pottsville and they had a good season. And then 27 is when things started to go a little downhill. So they played in 25 in Pottsville, 26 in Pottsville, 27 in Pottsville. Then they went 28, I believe, in Pottsville. And then 1929, ironically, the same year as the Great Depression, they become Boston. They move up to Boston and they become the Boston Bulldogs. What happened? Why did Pottsville ultimately leave Pottsville, move to Boston, and what happened there?
Well, a lot of it was financial instability. The Great Depression, Pottsville being a smaller team, you didn't have Doc Striegel involved in it anymore. You had some of the players had taken over. As a matter of fact, Fats Henry had returned back to the franchise and was helping out there. Charlie Berry was a part of that, and they've tried to go to a more lucrative opportunity. Boston being a bigger city as it is now than Pottsville is, and they tried to see if they could make some hay in Boston and make ends meet, because they were not a very financially soluble team up to that point. They sort of were losing money each year, even 1925.
Yeah, they played in a small town. It's that was one of the tough things for many of these NFL cities. Hey, they didn't have stadiums big enough to hold big crowds, and they just didn't get the kind of support they needed in some of those cities. So, jumping ahead again, we can't cover everything. They move on to Boston. The team folds. Several years later, they want to honor the town of Potts. They want to honor the Pottsville Maroons, and they want to put together, and you guys go into great detail about this. They want to do a reunion of sorts. Even at this point, these many years later, someone scratches their head and goes, wait, what do you mean we weren't crowned champions in 1925? What do you mean the Pottsville Maroons are not the owners of an NFL championship? So all along, not just some people, but almost everyone that has anything to do with Pottsville thinks, oh my gosh, we were champions, but we're not champions. And by the way, at this point too, there are some people in Pottsville who think that the Maroons, that's fictional. This team never even existed. Talk about that.
Yeah, so after Joe Zacco found out in 1945 that Pottsville was not the champs, he was pretty upset. And he decided to make it his mission to try to figure out how to get the championship back for the town. It was a long slog. It took him 16 years to get it off the ground. You have to realize, there's no internet. There was no way to get a hold of people. It was all word of mouth. these players had all scattered for the most part. They were in all over the place, and he was trying to track people down, trying to figure out how to get a movement going to get a championship back. One of his ideas was to have a reunion. Let's get the players back. Let's get them juiced up. Maybe we can use them and the press associated with it and try to get this back. And so he started trying to find these players, and he spent years sending letters and follow up to a follow up to a follow up, dead ends, return addresses. Charlie Berry, though, was instrumental in that. Joe Zacco reconnected with Charlie Berry. He was at this point, I think he was a supervisor of the umps, so he was traveling all around, still involved with Major League Baseball, well known still in the NFL because of his refereeing. And Charlie said, "Oh, well, I see people all the time. I'm all over the country, and I kept touch with all these guys." So he started connecting Zacco up with players, and in the end, I think they got 15 or 20 previous players to come back in '61 to their first reunion. And that was really what sparked all right, we need to make a push to get it back, get the championship back. And then it was a question of, well, how are we going to pull that off? Like, what's going to make the NFL pay attention?
Well, somehow they get a bunch of guys, some real big names in the NFL involved in much later years. They get the Hall of Fame involved because the Hall of Fame wants Maroons memorabilia in the Hall of Fame, and they're like, well, not so fast. You want our stuff, you got to do something for us. So the Hall of Fame gets involved in trying to reinstate or get awarded the Maroons to be awarded the 1925 NFL championship. You get the owners of the Eagles and the Steelers both say, absolutely, we support it. Pottsville should be the NFL champions. Pete Rozelle is on Pottsville's side. Promises were made, promises were kept, etc. Briefly, take me through what happened there.
Well, you had the Bidwell family. They wanted that championship, and they claimed, "Hey, we've been the franchise longer than anybody, and we've only got 2. We're not giving up 1, even though they didn't rightfully deserve the 1. 47, that's definitely theirs, but 25 was, by all accounts, they weren't the best team in the NFL. They played for a quasi championship and lost that game. The Chicago newspapers were claiming after that Pottsville beat them that Pottsville was the champions, even though there was 2 weeks left in the season. They tried to cheat their way to get a championship by having a better record, and it all failed, but they still got their championship. Bidwells did not want to give up that title. I don't think there was any monetary gain to them other than prestige of saying, hey, we're the 2-time champion Cardinals. And they still to this day do not want to give up that championship. It's like their family heirloom that they didn't even own the team at that time. So that's what's kind of interesting. But the bigger picture is that, that the town of Pottsville recognizes that most of us sort of somewhat overlook is Pottsville was the world champions. They beat the best 2 teams. They beat the best college team. They beat the best of the pro leagues. And that's all there was then. They were the world champions. If anybody's can call themselves world champions, it was Pottsville. And that's sort of their claim to fame.
So here's a hypothetical for both. And this is how we're going to leave this today. Chicago Cardinals are the oldest franchise, as we said in the beginning, in the NFL. They were Chicago Cardinals. Then they moved, became the St. Louis Cardinals. Then they moved, became the Phoenix Cardinals. Then up to Glendale, where they are the Arizona Cardinals. They are still in existence. Do you think if the Maroons existed in any way, shape, or form, that they would have a stronger case today than they do now. That perhaps we wouldn't be here talking about the Maroons and their case to be recognized as the 1925 NFL champions if they were somehow still in existence today. After all, the Cardinals are there saying, we don't want our championship taken. There's nobody really, there's no Maroons really to say, well, that was really our championship, give it back. What do you guys think?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Pottsville has no representative in the NFL. Nobody even remembers who the Maroons were. The NFL teams don't even know who the Maroons were. We see from the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting that they don't know who the Maroons were. Tony Latone should be in the Hall of Fame, period. End of story. I could write a whole book on Tony Latone and what he accomplished over what was a 15-year pro career. Just so happened only 5 of those was in the NFL. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. But because Pottsville's not in the league, they have no say. And the Cardinals aren't going to give. They wouldn't even give up. There was a recommendation in 1963 and 67 to just list them as co-champs. Cardinals, you keep your championship. It was a funky year, very controversial. We'll call it co-champions. Cardinals wouldn't even do that. They're so petty about this. It's probably because they've only won twice in 8 trillion years, or however long they've been in existence. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they'll never win again. Many of us are rooting for that. But all they had to do was say, yeah, sure, let's just call it co-champs. We get to keep our banner. They get to have a banner. Who cares, right? I do believe, one is that there would have been clarity in the late 20s and 30s about the championship. It wouldn't have gone for so long and then just kind of drifted toward the Cardinals if Pottsville had still been in the league. What are your thoughts, Darin?
It's somewhat unprecedented, but I guess if you're going to have any similarity, you could have the Detroit Lions, who at one time were the Portsmouth Spartans. They sort of had the 1932 championship hijacked, and they're still a franchise, but they're not clamoring to claim that championship because George Halas pulled a fast one. They had a late season game without their star player in Chicago in a snowstorm that got moved indoors on a smaller than field. So I guess if that would be the only parallel probably that you could have of an existing franchise, even though they're been relocated. But I don't think the NFL would do that, even if Detroit said, hey, we were champions in 32. We were at least co-champions. The NFL is probably going to say, hey, forget you. We're not doing that. This is long gone. So I don't know if Pottsville would have a case if they were still a franchise. I don't know if it would matter any more than what the evidence they have now to be a champion. And I think that speaks for itself. I think 1925, everybody knew who the champion was, and everybody sort of forgot a few years later, and it's just gone on in the history books as the Cardinals are the champions.
Well, guys, I want to thank you both for spending so much time with me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. It's really a fascinating story. And I really do wonder if the Maroons would have had a stronger case had they still been around today, even as the Boston Bulldogs. After all, the Arizona Cardinals were the Chicago Cardinals. So again, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. It's been a lot of fun, and I wish you a lot of luck with that book.
Thanks, Warren. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Warren. Really enjoyed it.
Anytime. The Maroons, according to NFL.com, went 10-2 in 1925 and finished atop the league standings. In 1926, they went 10-1, but the Chicago Bears won the league championship with a record of 10-2. In 1927, the Maroons went 5-7, and in 1928 they fell to 2-8. In 1929, their final year in the league, they moved to Boston, played as the Bulldogs, and finished the year with a 4-4 record. Thanks again to my guests today, Darin Hayes and Jeffrey Payne, and thanks to all of you for joining, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.